Welcome to Season 2 of Keeping It 100 Real Conversations with Jacqui, where each week we will discuss life experiences with subject matter experts. Stay tuned for this next episode. Hello and welcome to Keeping It 100 Conversations with Jacqui, where we discuss real life experiences. And today we have our very special guest, Tshenolo, and I'm your host, Jacqui Mmono. And thank you so much for joining us on this episode today. So today we're going to be talking about queer life, and Tshenolo has been kind enough. Actually, he's my darling brother, and we're going to be talking about everything queer, how his experiences have been. And I'm going to give him a chance to introduce themselves. How are you, Tshenolo?
Hi, I'm okay. I'm okay.
Good. How was your day? Oh, of course. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. My day was okay. I just, worked all day, and now here I am.
Yeah. No, that's good. Well, it's going to be so light. We're going to just have an easy conversation about everything, right? So let's, why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us who you are, what you do, where you live, if you want to disclose that, whatever. Like, just tell us all about you, honey.
Of course. Okay, cool. My name is Tshenolo, of course, as Jacqui just mentioned. Born and raised in Botswana, and I moved to Canada maybe 3 years ago now. So I'm in Vancouver, BC. I am a university student, and my pronouns are he, him, they, theirs, or sometimes she, hers. Depends on the day.
Perfect. I love it. Yeah. Hey, why not? Go with the flow, right? Okay, so Tshenolo is actually the baby of our family. So he's my youngest little sibling. And and he just happened to move out here 3.5 years ago. I was so happy, me being in Canada for about 15 years. It was just kind of nice to just have family around. So I'm just grateful for you. You know that. Right? So so let's dive into like the topic at hand. So Tshenolo, tell me, when was the first time when you realized or you came out, and literally just kind of, let's talk about how you feel like you came out, and how when you really truly kind of said, I don't think I am heterosexual, I may be gay or whatever. Like, when was it? Tell us your experience, how it felt like, how you went about it. I'm sure there's a lot of people that can relate to your story as well. So tell me all about it. I don't even think I know the actual story, actually. So those will be nice and interesting.
I have a feeling you asked me to do this specifically so you know the details of my life.
Maybe. No, I'm kidding. No.
Same. Okay. I guess I would start off with when I was in high school, start of high school, maybe. That was probably the point where I was like, okay, maybe I'm a little bit different, in the sense that people, it was more people would ask me questions. Honestly, I had no idea. I didn't think about it. It wasn't even a topic of discussion in my mind. Until, people would ask me, my friends would ask me, or people at school would ask me, and ask me if I was gay and blah, blah, blah. And I would be like, I don't know what that means. I've never thought about it. I don't know anything about it. And then I kind of started to of course, a lot happened there. There was just a lot of negativity, especially the high school that I went to. But I am grateful for the fact that I was able to find, I guess, a source of knowledge and a source of just community in YouTube, which is really strange. But I think the people in my generation, especially, we spent a lot of time on YouTube, growing up, and so I just sat and watched YouTube videos all day. I started to learn a lot more about queer culture and what it means to be somebody, in the LGBT plus community, and so on and so forth. So it took a while, of course, but I guess the first point where I was like, oh, maybe I'm not straight, is actually, I can't even pinpoint the specific point. I do remember I came out to one of my best friends at the time, who came out to me as bi, and so I felt a lot more comfortable at the time to say to her, at least. And then I went from there. I never really came out to family per se, mainly because I don't, especially the older that I get and the older that the older I become, I just feel like it's kind of unnecessary, and not unnecessary. It depends on the person. I think it depends on the person. I just don't feel like I speak for myself. Like how I present myself speaks for itself, and I guess I just happen to be the most feminine person you can think of.
Mhm.
So I don't feel like I need to come out per se.
To explain
Um,
yourself. No, which makes sense. And that's one thing that sometimes I've always kind of wondered. I was like, when you're straight, you don't exactly come out and say, "Oh, I'm straight," right? Or
exactly.
so why, or if we're talking religion, or not necessarily religion, or yeah, if you're talking religion, you're not gonna just come out here and be like, "Hey guys, I have a confession to make, I'm Christian," or like,
Right.
or if you're black, you're not, I'm not gonna be like, "Oh my goodness, you guys, guess what, I'm black." People can typically see it, so it comes down to that too. So I feel like the same should apply to our sexuality. Is like, why should one, I mean, unless it's not really apparent and you really do feel like you need to break it down to certain
Right.
family members, sure. But is
Right.
it necessary? I'm not sure. So yeah, that's why we have you on the show, so that we can really break down those barriers, especially living in Botswana, where um being gay wasn't necessarily um something that was recognized, or people thought it would be a phase, or there was legality thing behind it, where it, I don't know if I'm saying it right, but like basically being gay
Mhm.
was illegal, which is the dumbest thing that I've ever heard. I'm just being
The
real.
words of the
Right?
Constitution, right? Yeah, of course. The Constitution
Mm,
at the time specifically said that you could be imprisoned for up to 7 years or given a fine for
yeah.
um yeah, and it goes down to the point of the times of colonization. Like the Constitution just never was updated from the times when we were like a British protectorate in the what 19 we got our independence
First of
1966,
all, I
and
don't
then
even
that just never
understand why they
happened.
even had that constitution to begin with. Right?
Well, yeah, and that's the problem. That just goes to show how colonization has such a big impact on even African countries today. Like a lot of them hold on to these values of anti-gay and anti-homosexuality because of what religion has taught us and what colonization has taught us. But a lot of people might, a lot of religious people, I would say, might disagree, but that's
Mm.
my perspective, and I think that's the perspective a lot of people that have sat down and looked at what African history looks like before, or looked like before colonization mainly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, okay, so now transitioning from, being in Botswana, and now you live in Canada,
Yeah.
and obviously, as you know, you're probably in the best city in the in the world, in
I don't
Canada.
know about
In
best.
I mean, I don't know about best, but like, I mean, I don't know. Like, I feel like, people in Vancouver are just like more open minded, and that's my opinion at least, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about now, coming from living in Botswana. We'll probably dive back into, what it was like in Botswana, and we'll talk a little bit more, dive into, the discriminatory stuff behind it or whatever. We'll come back to it, but like, now coming from Botswana, now you're in Vancouver. How's your life here, and how have you kind of eased yourself into the culture here? Or are there any differences or indifferences? What's your take on that?
Moving to Vancouver, I guess I would say for sure it allowed me just this move. The reason why I needed to move in the first place was because I needed to find my own independence, and I just felt like I needed to be like my own person outside of my family. Growing up in Botswana, especially, like you spend your entire time with your family for the most part, except when you're at school, and when you're there, like there's a sense that like you'll never actually like get out of the house and like live on your own if you stay living in the same city. You kind of have to live with your parents the entire time.
Hmm.
So when I
So they
moved, I was
say.
like,
We don't have to,
what they
but
say. Of course, you don't have to, but I mean, look at the reality of things. It might be just a little bit more difficult to actually like get out of the house, and like
right.
depending on the type of job here, like the culture here is just different. You leave your parents' house as soon as you turn 18, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. There you
anyway,
can live for as long as you want. Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And sometimes that's a benefit. That sometimes you don't have to worry about, being kicked out, things like that. But I
You could
think
be
when I
40
moved
years
here,
old and you'll still be living at home, right?
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, that's all right. Yep. Okay.
Yeah, but when I moved here, I just felt like I knew that I needed to like find the world for myself and see the world for myself. And like, it wasn't necessarily about, like, of course, a big part of it was about my identity, but another part of it was just about my own, knowledge of the world and being able to physically travel if I wanted to. Unfortunately, Botswana is also in like a geographic location where it's like really south of Africa, and so being able to travel around, it was just a little bit more expensive. And so I knew that if I was, let's say in Canada somewhere, it would be a lot easier for me to go to different places, whether that's South America, whether that happens to be Australia, whether that happens to be somewhere in Asia. It's just a little bit more
Mm-hmm.
accessible, I guess. Um, so that was one part. And then, like I said, yes, the identity part. It was not only finding my sexual orientation or like figuring that out, it was more me finding out who I am as a person and like my own
As an
identity as a
individual
person.
person versus being tied. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And without the expectations, without like the I guess just the rules and guidelines of, your how you were raised your entire life.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. And okay, so like, okay, so when once you were here, like the friends that you made, do you find that like your friends, it was just so natural just to kind of integrate with in terms of friends, maybe even like the queer community? How did you find that transition? Basically, how was that for you?
That was a lot less smooth as I expected. Initially, I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna move here and I'm gonna make all these friends and it's gonna be fun and it's gonna be great." And then I actually moved, and for anyone, moving is difficult. For anyone, finding friends is difficult. And Vancouver is not like I'm fortunate enough to have gone to a university where, like, especially going into first year, a lot of people were like looking for friends. And so it was easy to make friends, but not close friends. It took a
Right.
while for me to eventually find my close friends. And weirdly enough, the closest friends I do have happen to be from Botswana, mainly because we have
Okay.
so much in common. Like, we have, the same background, or at least similar background. And then on top of that, of course, there's friends from here, or friends that happen to be from other parts of the world, who
Right.
sometimes are queer, sometimes aren't queer, sometimes they happen to be black, sometimes they're not. It depends on the person, depends on the connection and
Hmm.
the relationship. But I'm I would say moving here was, beneficial, but initially it was like it took a while for me to actually make real close connections. And not to say I never made them like from the get go, but
Hmm.
it just took a while for me to be fully comfortable in the city, for instance. Because I lived on campus for a good 2-3 years. Most of
Right.
my time in Canada was on UBC campus. So to not then, like, it makes it so much harder to actually integrate into the city. Now that I'm out, like, I'm off campus, I
Right.
feel a lot more connected to not just um the city, but the people who live here. Like, the recently I just went to like a Black queer event for Pride,
Hmm.
and it was the
That's
first time I felt like,
exciting. How was that?
right. It was amazing. It was the first time I
Yeah.
felt like I was actually part of a community, like of this kind
Yeah.
of community at least. And a queer community where I felt like fully able to just be myself and express myself the way I wanted to express myself. Um,
I love that.
and thankfully, I had a friend with me, because at the time I was like, ooh, I don't like just social anxiety. I was like, wow, this is a lot to take in. There's a lot of people to meet. There's way too much going on. So yeah, but it was great. It was really fun. It was nice that I knew some people at least at this event, and
Hmm.
you eventually just kind of like that's how it goes. You break down the barriers by actually feeling comfortable
Yeah.
with them.
Did you ever have like the fear that you would struggle to kind of find communities where you feel like you
Yeah,
belong? Yeah.
yeah.
Was that something
All
that all
still
the
is.
time?
I mean,
Hmm.
still
Yeah.
is. Even when I
Yeah.
think about like if I ever moved away from Vancouver, it's like, okay, if I move away, and then where do I go? Who do I meet?
Hmm.
Like, what happens there? You know.
Hmm. Hmm.
But other than that, like, I mean, now I don't struggle with it too much or as much as before, but it's definitely still something that like I think about once in a while. Like, it's like you never know who, like, when you walk in a room, you never know who's gonna be um quote unquote offended by your presence. And who's gonna
Yeah,
accept it.
which in my opinion, I'm like, geez, people should just bugger off. Mind your own business. I don't know, like.
But thankfully, being in Vancouver, that's not necessarily like, especially Vancouver, it's like so much harder to like encounter those types of people. I'm glad that I'm in a city where, like, yes, I do feel like for the most part I can walk around and feel comfortable and not worry too much about that kind of stuff. Sometimes I worry more about walking in a room and being the only Black person than I do feeling like I'm the only queer person.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's always a right. That I mean, I guess
there's a balance there.
That's fair. So now, like, this social event that you went to, are there any more? I mean, of course, there's so many more like queer events out in Vancouver and probably all over Canada. Like, do you find that your friends tend to, give you a little bit more insight into what events are out there? Are you part of like groups, let's say online? Are you, you know what I mean? Have you integrated yourself into some of these groups as well?
I think for me, it's more the way that I feel like I connect with people is just through individual referrals. So, like, let's say a friend of mine says, "Hey, here's this event going on," especially because it was like it was Pride Week in Vancouver. So we have our Pride usually at the end of July, beginning of August, and so it just so happened that there were so many more like African Pride events or like Black Pride events, and
I like that. I like that they actually had an African Pride event.
Yeah, it was Black exclusive, all queer people for the most part, and it was amazing. Honestly, like I cannot imagine how I don't know how to express the way that I felt there. It felt like home. I remember walking in and thinking, this feels like when I was in Botswana, except now there's a ton of queer people.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. Well, I'm glad that you had that experience. That's amazing. This is great that we actually having the podcast after you went to this event, right?
Right.
So being queer, as we know, there's a different type of queer people. The acronym, I don't even know the acronyms from the top of my head. LGBTQ
plus. You can,
Anyway, there's so many of them. So what would you identify yourself as out of those acronyms? I mean, I guess if you know, if you don't, I don't know if that's something that you would know or not.
Right. I would say that I would rather not specifically identify as like any label, mainly because I used to, like, when I was younger, I was obsessed with it. I was like, am I the G, am I the B, am I the T, am I the, like, which one am I? But then there's so much nuance to it. There's so many things that, like, I would rather just not, limit myself in the sense that I find any kind of identity, anybody in the world, most of the time people will be on some form of spectrum, and that spectrum is continuous. It can change constantly, basically.
And I was going to say it's it probably goes in waves as well, like
the older you get, the more you realize you enjoy certain things, or you identify with certain things, and you want to express yourself in certain ways, and
100%, yeah. Like, I mean, I think it goes for heterosexual sexual people too, right? Like, there's people that are totally monogamous. There's people that prefer to be absolutely not monogamous at all. There's people that are willing to explore bisexuality. There's people, you know what I mean? There's so many different ways, and this goes in different waves throughout your life as an adult as well, that you can't necessarily just label yourself. What you needed in your 20s doesn't necessarily mean you want it in your 30s or 40s or 50s, right? Exactly. Or even in your 80s, or for as long as you're living, right? So yeah, I totally get that. Okay, I actually like that answer. Love it. Okay. Okay, so now when we get back into the discriminatory aspect, like focusing on specifically, discrimination comes in so many different ways. Homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, so many phobias, right? Like even for heterosexuals, there's so many different other terms that could be used. What are you finding are your challenges at this point? I mean, being Black, being gay, what are those challenges that you've had to face, whether you were in Botswana and whether you're in Vancouver, right? Like anybody else could
Right.
probably relate with what it is and how you kind of go about dealing with it. What are your coping mechanisms, right? Like, why don't we go
Right.
into that? Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think my biggest issue, especially when I was growing up, was like the feeling of like never finding the a place where I can be myself in between the intersection of being Black and being queer and everything in between. Like it was like if I walk in a room and I'm the only Black person, then I'm uncomfortable to an extent, or like at least I'm thinking about it. And I think that's an experience for many Black people. And then if I walk into a
Mm-hmm.
room and I happen to be the only queer person, same kind of situation. And then like finding a space where I can be both Black and queer and everything in between is like, I guess, extra difficult. So I guess right now I don't necessarily like, again, I don't necessarily think about this very often, but when I do, if there was like a coping mechanism for me to, apply, it would most likely just be like really going into myself and really understanding who I am and trying
Mm-hmm.
my best to be as confident as I am in my own shell, without necessarily basically trying to ignore the white noise is what I'm trying to describe. You
That
walk in
makes
a place,
sense.
you speak to somebody who happens to be not so understanding of certain things, and you kind of just have to, unfortunately, in the society, I tend to end up being the one to either educate or to, reel myself back in and, hope that this person will quote unquote learn when, mm, I mean, I don't necessarily need to be teaching everyone, of course. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I
as
mean,
a
it's not your
person, like,
responsibility either, right?
it's not exactly. But
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately, that's how I kind of grew up that way. Like, I had to either
Mm-hmm.
teach people what it means to be Black or I had to teach people what it means to be queer.
Yeah.
And, those happen to be two of the things that, like, in my identity, in terms of my identity, I have to kind of like think about regularly. But again, like I just like to say, of course, there's areas in my life where like I think I've been allowed to um, flourish and really truly be myself, and I'm really grateful for those experiences. Even living in Botswana, as much as you would assume that like or people would assume that an African country might not necessarily be like super accepting. I do think Botswana is one of those countries where at least there's movement and people can, to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
feel comfortable in their own spaces. Of course, it depends on the person, depends on the scenario, depends on the experience. But in my personal, experience, I was lucky enough to go to a second high school that was really accepting too, and was just very, I guess, quote unquote, progressive, in
Right.
allowing me as a queer person to be fully queer without having to worry about, will teachers say something, will my friends say something, will I feel uncomfortable if I walk in a room. I didn't necessarily feel those things, or
Mm-hmm.
not. Eventually I kind of unlearned those things, I mean. But I don't know, it's just one of those things where like if I really truly feel uncomfortable, hey, I might just clock out. I might just choose not to engage.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to do it.
Yeah,
But at the
sometimes
same
it's not
time,
worth the fight.
that makes sense. So like, okay, so like, what are some? Do you like? I know that some people would probably even seek some form of, either group therapy or even just individual
Yeah.
therapy, or are there any resources that you would maybe want to share with anyone maybe who's in Vancouver and that like listening to the show and they're like, well, like, how do I go about dealing with certain things? What would be your advice on that aspect?
I mean, in Vancouver especially, I would say trying your best to find a community would be the first start. And that
Yeah.
can be one other person. That can be a small group of people. I think you need to have, especially if you're like an international student or like somebody that just moved from really far, you need to find um
Mm-hmm.
a group of people to like really truly be yourself around, and not have to worry too much about like your identity. Um I think that would be the first step. If you're looking for things like group therapy, thankfully there's I just don't remember the name off the top of my head, but there are resources out there, especially in Vancouver, for like young people who are dealing with different types of issues, whether that's anxiety or social
Mhm.
anxiety, whether that's depression, and so on and so forth. Those things are available. You just kind of have to unfortunately search for them. And it
Yeah.
took me 3 years to realize, like, through my school, I get I can get insurance for my therapy sessions.
Right.
I
Hmm.
had no idea for 3 years. You kind of just have to like ask the right questions and like meet the right people, and somehow it'll
Yeah.
come up. But I would say the first and foremost, I would say find a community within your own
Pardon
bubble,
me.
somewhere,
Hmm.
of course, somewhere where you can be fully comfortable, and hopefully from there it kind of snowballs. Um,
Makes sense.
so yeah.
Okay, well, no, that's good to know. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of our show here, but one
Mhm.
thing that I always ask every guest that I interview or like that I chat with, what would be your advice and takeaway to anyone that's basically struggling with coming out or being themselves or not being comfortable in their own skin, maybe even or maybe they are queer and they're still having so many struggles. What would be your takeaway on that?
I would say take your time with it. Don't rush it. Don't go at anybody else's pace. It's your journey. It's your life. It's your experience, and nobody else can tell you how to live it.
Hmm.
That would be my first thing. And then also, you know, again, surrounding yourself with people who accept you and who are kind enough to allow, maybe not allow you, but who you can feel comfortable enough to be yourself around. Um, because that honestly is like an experience that you can't. It's invaluable. There's no way you
Hmm.
can find that in any other experience. You just having people who support you and who love you no matter what. That's something that you need. And
I
anybody
love
out there
that.
needs. Versus, and that goes for anyone, whether you're queer or whether you happen to be
Yeah.
an international student or somebody moving away from their home and moving somewhere, or it applies to just about everyone. And I think that's something that most people in the world, they need.
Yeah. So
Mm.
it's so I like that actually. I love it. I mean, being your older sister and I love you regardless of whatever sexual orientation you are, honey. You be you. Guys, like if there's anyone that does amazing makeup, it's my little brother Tshenolo. So if you're in Vancouver and you're looking for like to glam up and you're just looking for a little photo shoot, he's got you, right? So but I would
I
love
do.
you regardless, and I feel like at least I mean I will speak for myself, and I'm hoping I think everybody at home, they're accepting of you no matter who you are. I've never, at least from my experience, unless you have anything else to say on that, but anyway, I think love people are people. It doesn't matter whether you're queer or heterosexual or nothing, or you know what I mean. Like everybody is a human being in this world, and I love it. Thank you so much for joining us on this show here. Do you have any? Do if people wanted to ask questions or maybe kind of reach out to you if maybe they were curious about anything, especially if they're in your location, Vancouver, do you have any way that people can reach out to you? Do you like, or if you don't have to say yes.
I mean, you could try and message me on Instagram.
On
I
Instagram?
can't promise that I'll respond immediately, but if it's in there, I'll find it eventually, hopefully.
Totally.
But
You
it's
want to
Grace
share your
Corner.
handle with the audience, and I'll also
Yeah,
put it on the show notes.
totally. It's Graves underscore corner. So GRAES underscore corner CORNE.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Senator, for joining us on the show today.
Thank you
And
so
my
much.
little takeaway is from what I've learned from you today is take your time. Everything is a process. And be patient with yourself. Be kind, right?
Yes,
And surround yourself with people that will support you.
exactly.
Right? We're on it, right? All right. Okay, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I love it. All right. So just to close it off, thank you so much for listening, you guys. And hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you guys have any questions, comments, feedback, please don't hesitate to either send us a quick email at Jacqui@rhythmfitness.ca. Also, you can feel free to rate our show as well. That's how we progress and that's how we get better. We love your feedback. And thanks again for joining us today. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode. Please do not forget to leave us an awesome review and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and keep your notifications on for the next episodes ahead. If you'd like to be a guest on our show, please do not hesitate to contact us at Jacqui@rhythmfitness.ca.